Mr. Deepak Dwivedi, Mr. Willie Bed, Professor Rajpal, Dr. Bindeshwar Pathak, Mr. Ez, Mr. Mishra, Mr. Chatterjee, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me at the outset first compliment Mr. Deepak Dwivedi for his unique dynamism in organizing today's SDGs dialogue and setting the agenda for South-South cooperation on this. And so it's great credit to him. Let's give him a big clap. Let us also compliment him for this wonderful book which he's published on SDG goals and South-South cooperation, which I'm really honored to have written the foreword for. We also compliment him for his Nagrik dialogue and this lovely calendar on sustainable development goals. So many achievements to the credit of Mr. Deepak Dwivedi, and I think he's a man of great energy, great dynamism, great vibrancy, and he's a man of great vision. So it's wonderful to be with him today evening on this unique occasion of SDG goals. And I think more important than that is the issue of South-South cooperation. So ladies and gentlemen, the Sustainable Development Goals were envisioned for creating a better future for all of us. 193 countries collaborated. There were 17 goals, 169 targets. And how do we achieve this? So ladies and gentlemen, the challenge is that, as was said earlier, it's important for the world to grow. And to have growth with equity, and have growth with equity in a very, very sustainable manner. That is the key challenge. We in India have been growing at about 7.5%. Last quarter, we grew at 8.2%. But the challenge is that how do we do this in an extremely sustainable manner? India is passing through a window of demographic transition, which rarely happens in history. Our average age is 29, 70% of our population is below the age of 30. And to my mind, this is the biggest social and economic transition that is taking place across the world. The population in India and in the southern part of the world is getting younger and younger, whereas the population across the world, particularly in America, in Europe, is getting older and older. There are 8,500 Americans retiring a day, there are 8,000 Germans retiring a day, whereas the population in India will keep getting younger and younger till 2042. So this, to my mind, is the most defining feature of the world. The second key aspect is that the American part of the world is urbanized, the European part of the world is urbanized, China's urbanization is nearing its completion, whereas India and in the African part of the world, the process of urbanization has just begun. And in the next 15 to 20 years, in the next 3 to 4 decades, we will see a huge amount of urbanization. India will see every minute as I speak here today, that 30 Indians will move from rural to urban areas. By 2050, if you go by the latest McKinsey study, India will see 700 million people getting into the process of urbanization. And the challenge is that when America, Europe urbanized, land, gas, water were all cheaply available. And because they were cheaply available, America had the luxury of living in New Jersey, traveling to New York, guzzling gas. You could travel in big, big limousines. And you could create a city like Atlanta where 99.8% of the people actually travel by cars. So American cities were made for cars and not for people. Now, in India, when the process of urbanization has just begun, land, gas, water are all scarce commodities. And therefore, it's also important to realize that cities in the world occupy just 3% of the earth land mass. But they account for almost 83% of the GDP. 3% of the earth land mass, 83% of GDP, but they also account for almost 72% of CO2 emission. And therefore, the challenge for India when it urbanizes is that how does it drive growth, how does it drive urbanization, but does it in a very, very innovative and sustainable manner. And many of these lessons of good sustainable urbanization, they don't come from the western part of the world, they come from the eastern part of the world, they come from cities like Yokohama, Kitakyushu, they come from Singapore, and these are huge learning lessons of how do you recycle your water, how do you recycle your waste, how do you make your people travel by public transport, and how do you actually create a more sustainable model of urbanization. And therefore, to my mind, the challenge of sustainable development goals can never be met without a South-South cooperation. There are huge learning lessons from each other. And without a South-South cooperation, the challenge really is to bring in technology, to innovate. And without technological innovation, the world can never grow and India can never achieve sustainable development goals. To my mind, the challenge is that how do you create, how today we are able to provide to our farmers better seed and fertilizer based on weather and soil conditions on a real-time basis so that his productivity goes up. How does he use technology to leapfrog? And how do we provide better learning outcomes? How do we ensure that our children, where we've been able to provide excess of education but perform very poorly in learning outcomes, how do we do tracking of our children both longitudinally and latitudinally, much like we track Uber cars? How do we ensure that we are able to provide better health for our citizens? Because 660 lakh people in this country, 660 lakh people in this country go below the poverty line simply because we are not able to provide tertiary care for them. And therefore, many of these challenges have been met in several of the things which have been driven in the last 4 years. The Swachhata Abhiyan, for instance, where we were just 34% of toilets have gone up to 96%, and several states and cities have become, and districts have become ODF, simply because they've been driven with mission, with zeal, and with better technology. Or look at our own startup movement, which has become the third best ecosystem in the world, which has enabled technology, enabled us to use technology, and India is the only country in the world which has 1 billion plus mobile, 1.2 billion mobile, 1.3 billion biometric, and about 1 billion bank account. And it enables all of us to use our mobile phone to do much of our digital transactions, or use, has enabled us. About a decade back, I was working in the fishery sector of Kerala to ensure that traditional fishermen get a higher return of his catch. And there, while we were able to provide outboard motors, better crafts, fiberglass crafts, better fishing nets, enabled them to go much further into the sea. But it was a nightmare opening their bank accounts and chasing physical managers and chasing physical banks was a nightmare. It used to take me 10 to 11 months to open their bank accounts. Last month, I walked into a bank account and using a handheld device, opened a bank account in 55 seconds flat. So India's journey has been from 11 months of opening a bank account to 55 seconds. That has been the transition by sheer use of technology, by sheer use of biometric handheld devices has enabled India to leapfrog. And my view is that in the years to come, India will be the first country which will actually extinguish physical banks, which will extinguish physical bank managers, and which will enable digital transactions to take place. It will be the first country which will do away with debit cards, credit cards, with ATMs, and all of us will actually be using our mobile for all our digital transactions. And therefore, to my mind, technology will be one of the key drivers of growth in India. And once you make technology the key driver of growth and you bring in great energy vitality, because the other day I was talking to the director of IIT Mumbai, who said that last year, out of the students who passed out, almost 50% actually did their own startup or joined a startup. And therefore, many of these people, unlike my generation, are actually disrupting the world of tomorrow. They are doing innovative things. They are doing a vast number of things using technology to leapfrog. And I think the other key thing for this great South-South cooperation is what was touched upon, is not merely to cooperate in the world of technology on how we can learn from each other, but how we can create better infrastructure. And I think it'll be critical for all of us to be able to create better world-class infrastructure, because that will again be a key driver of growth. But to achieve sustainable development growth, to my mind, there are two critical things. One is our ability to better measure the implementation of the SDG goals, and secondly, our ability to better monitor and implement them. And both of these require real-time tracking, much like what we have tried to do. You know, when we started our ease of doing business, we tracked every single outcome. The first year we did it, Gujarat came number 1. Second year we did it, Andhra beat Gujarat. The third year we did it, Telangana beat Andhra and Gujarat. But the good thing was that the eastern part of India, Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand, came 4th and 5th, and they made a quantum jump simply because we were making good governance, good politics, by naming and shaming, by putting everything in public domain. And the people were questioning as to why their states were falling behind. The next year we did this on health, this year we are doing it in education, and last year we did this on water management. And once we start putting outcomes, we start putting it in public domain, we start naming and shaming states, districts, blocks, and start measuring. To my mind, the key is about better measurement and putting it in public domain. Performance will improve, SDG implementation will improve, and the country will jump up the ladders. And therefore, this is what we've learned by better in our administrative mechanism, that essentially it is about better implementation, it's about better measurement, it's about putting things in public domain. And I think all this is something which we are doing in aspirational district. My belief is that India can never achieve sustainable development goals despite high levels of growth till we do not do it with equity. And if you look at the map of India, you'll look at vast pockets of green, which will be the southern part of India. You'll see vast pockets of green, which will be the western part of India. But if you look at the map of India, there'll be 115 districts which will keep India backwards always. And these 115 districts keep India backwards in nutrition, in education, in health, in skill, in financial inclusion, and in agriculture. And therefore, the Prime Minister launched the aspirational district program. He didn't call it the backward districts, he called it the aspirational district. And we took out 49 indicators. And in these 49 indicators, what did we do? We put out the baseline, and we said in the baseline, in the same state, one district does very badly, but another district does very well. It's not about that the resources are not flowing there. Resources are flowing, but the administration is collapsed. There's no morale. There's no energy, there's no dynamism in that district. There are huge vacancies. And therefore we said that on a real-time basis, minute to minute, hours to hours, we will track the performance on these 49 indicators. We'll rank these districts, and we started ranking these districts. And when we started ranking these districts, and we not merely ranking the districts, but on the 115 districts, we were actually ranking the performance of the states with reference to these districts. And we've seen a huge, sharp improvement on these 49 indicators. Infant mortality is improved, maternal mortality is improved, nutrition standards have improved by putting this in public domain. We've challenged the states. So once you challenge the states, things improve. And therefore, my belief is that it's not possible to achieve sustainable development goals till you're not able to provide better nutrition standards, which has been abysmal in India. You can't do it without improving learning outcomes, where there's a huge need for better improvement. You can't do this without improving health outcomes, without infant mortality improving, without maternal mortality improving. And you can't do this without enhancing earnings of the people living in these areas. And therefore, you need better financial inclusion, you need better agricultural productivity. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, the challenge about sustainable development is about better implementation, it's about better monitoring, and it's about putting better administration. And better administration requires real-time monitoring, and it requires real-time tracking on digital dashboards and putting things in public domain minute to minute, and so that every single citizen of India must know as to why some districts move up, some states move up, and others remain behind. And once you challenge them and put it in public domain, people will vote for those who perform. Good governance will become good politics. And that is the route to sustainable development goals. And the route to sustainable development goals is the only way is better delivery on ground. And the better delivery on ground is something which we all learn from each other. And that is the way for South-South cooperation. With these few words, I conclude. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.